I'm Dean Newlund, and welcome to Leadovation. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. This podcast is dedicated to the art and science of innovative leadership. Through insightful interviews with industry experts, I bring you cutting-edge strategies and experiences of innovative leadership, helping you think differently, act strategically, and achieve remarkable results. Join me as I provide insights and tools that empower you to make smarter decisions, forge meaningful relationships. Welcome to Leadovation. Have you ever had everything look fine on the outside? Career, family, health, yet somewhere deep inside a quiet voice whispered, "This isn't it." That whisper is where today's conversation begins. My guest is Ben Katt, a transformation coach, meditation teacher, hospice chaplain, and author of The Way Home, Discovering the Hero's Journey to Wholesomeness at Midlife. Ben has spent his life guiding people back to themselves, often at the moment where their well-built lives begin to unravel or no longer feel true. In this powerful conversation, Ben shares how burnout became his own call to adventure, why the hero's journey isn't just a myth but a map, and how turning into the subtle signals of our inner life might just save us from collapse or worse, a life half lived. We explore what it really takes to step into the unknown, how joy can live alongside uncertainty, and why those with the least often carry the deepest wisdom. So if you're feeling restless, disoriented, or simply longing for something more, this episode will speak directly to you. Ben Katt is a spiritual coach, meditation teacher, and storyteller. He's the author of The Way Home, a certified advanced meditation teacher with one giant mind, and the founder of Within Project, bringing meditation into prisons. He designs and leads workshops at the Modern Elder Academy, which, by the way, is how I met him last January. Wonderful time. Provides end-of-life care at a hospice as a hospice chaplain, and formerly led spiritual initiatives at the On Being Project. Ben lives in Milwaukee, Wisconsin with his wife and 3 children. This is the Leadovation Podcast. I'm Dean Newlund. Let's begin. So Ben, I've been looking forward to this for a while. I really have. There are certain episodes and certain people I'm thinking like, hey, this is going to be a really good conversation. And this is definitely one of them. And the reason why, of course, is that we met over at MEA, the Modern Elder Academy, back in, I think it was the end of January 2025 of this year. And just, you did such a phenomenal job of leading that workshop. And I'm a critic when it comes to facilitators because it's my world. I mean, so I suppose if you're a chef, you constantly are looking at food and preparation. And as a facilitator that does, facilitations all the time, I immediately just relaxed into your leadership and your ability to facilitate. And I knew that at that point, this was going to be a fantastic week. But within that first 5 minutes, of course, you're kind of like going, how is this going to go? So first and foremost, kudos to you. You did a phenomenal job. And I'm so glad you're on the show. I want to ask a softball question because you do so many things. And you've been working with people in hospice. You've been working in the correctional facilities regarding meditation. You're a coach, you're an author, you're fascinated by the hero's journey, and now you're doing a lot more work with Chip Conley's MEA over in those 2 different locations. What brought all this together? I mean, what were the life events that kind of caused this path to happen? And is there a sort of a common theme? Maybe that's the second question that goes along with this.
I love that. Well, Dean, so good to be with you here on your podcast. Thanks for having me, and such a joy to meet you and get to hear a bit of your story back in January. So, maybe I'll start with the second question because that provides a bit of a frame through which people can follow maybe some of what I share. And that would be, for the longest time, I've understood my calling, my purpose, my work in the world to be at the center or intersection of 3 things: spirituality or inner life, community and belonging, and social healing, service, social change, however you want to talk about that. And there's been a variety of vehicles or delivery systems that vocation has through which that vocation has been expressed. And it really began coming right out of college. I went into divinity school and I got a master's of divinity degree, soon moved to Seattle with my wife, and I started a church when I was 27 years old. On one hand, I'm like, what did I know? And I'm also so grateful I didn't know a lot, because I had sort of the courage to start something like that. And it ended up becoming just a really beautiful community of people, um, organizing our life together for mutual well-being and the flourishing of our community and service, and, you know, trying to live a life of contemplation. Really beautiful. So beautiful. In fact, I just returned from a trip with some of our dear friends who are scattered all over the country. About 33 of us gathered together, and more than half of those were children. But
Hmm.
I did that for about 10 years. And that church, by the way, it's still there in Seattle. I got to name it because I started it, and it was called Awake Church. It was a word that came to me when I was beginning to dream about that. So um, I put that word sort of alongside those three things that are, you know, that my work is at the center of. But this idea of waking up, feel
Hmm.
very called to and passionate about not only waking up myself more and more to who I am and to what is really real, but also helping others wake up to their fullest, freest life. And after about 10 years in the church, I did some more coaching and leadership around faith-based organizations, churches, and other things. That led me to that was a really heavy season in my life, actually, and we can get into that more. That's what my book, The Way Home, is really about, is the inner journey that took place during that time. But coming out of that, I worked for Krista Tippett at the On Being Project, and their work is very much about asking these big questions. What does it mean to be human, and how do we belong to one another? And again, yeah, came out of that, finished writing my book, had some doors open I've been teaching meditation since 2019, and that ended up bringing me into some prisons here in Southeast Wisconsin. Have been in hospice for about 2 years in both volunteer and as a chaplain capacity. So, but I guess if I say what's at the center of all it is those things. It's inner life, it's belonging, and it's being a healing presence for our society and world.
Hmm. That's fantastic. So you are also somewhat of an expert on Joseph Campbell's work on the hero's journey. So for those who don't understand it, it's very popular, but it may not be for everybody. Give us a quick rundown of what that is.
Yeah. So Joseph Campbell, famous 20th century mythologist, who is famous really because essentially like George Lucas and Star Wars came across his work later as they were telling some of their stories and realized, oh, this is what we're doing. And this is how to tell a good story. Well, as they got into Campbell's work, part of what they discovered, and this is why it's resonated with so many people, is he looked at stories and myths and folk tales, fables from across different cultures, across place and time, and he discovered what he called the monomyth, a central story that runs through all of these. And yes, there's absolutely variation, but he one of the names he gave for this was the hero's journey. Campbell has something like 17 steps to his hero's journey, and they're organized in three categories: departure, initiation, and return. And so, just to sketch it out really quickly, most people are probably familiar uh, with Star Wars, for example, or say Marvel movies. You see this all over. But Luke Skywalker has this particular life in a particular place with particular people, but then some things happen, right? I think his aunt and uncle are killed. I don't know the story perfectly, but
Yeah, I think you got it.
he is essentially thrust from what is the status quo, life as it is, and
Hmm.
he is sent into the unknown and into uncertainty. Along the way, a guide meets him, Obi-Wan Kenobi. So all this help comes. He gains allies, but he's got to face challenges that come to him in the form of the Empire, and ultimately discovers his father, who is Darth Vader. And in each of one of these movies, there's that pattern of departure, initiation, and then return is kind of the victory. And by the way, most movies just spend like a little bit on the victory part. You
Hmm.
know, most of the stories we watch or read, the bulk of it is in that second act. So here's the thing. I came across Campbell's work a while ago, but I really got familiar with it when I was coming out of this deep soul journey in my own life that I alluded to earlier. And I was reading Hero with a Thousand Faces. That's his kind of most popular book on this. And it's a pretty big book. And I just saw myself in those pages. I was like, this is what I lived. And so I began to reflect more on my own journey and came up with my own version, sort of a distillation of Campbell's work. So I like to talk about leaving the familiar, falling into the unknown, and rising to wholeness. And my concern, both in the book, in the coaching work I do, and speaking and things like that, is helping everyday people see themselves, see their own lives through that lens, and realize that kind of a couple things. One, you're not the first person to go through this, and there's something really supportive and encouraging about that reality. But also, two, you have your own unique version of this universal pattern or universal story, and no one else can go on this journey for you. No coach can do it. No guru. No podcast person. No influencer. No religious teacher or whatever. You're the only person who can embark on this journey of stepping beyond what you've known, stepping beyond these sort of operating patterns that you've outgrown, undergoing sort of an initiation into what is into the darkness, into, you know, sort of wandering in the wilderness, facing your shadows, tending to your wounds, acknowledging your grief, and
Hmm.
then coming through that with a greater sense of clarity. This is rising to wholeness about who you are, why you're here, what's your purpose, what's the contribution you want to make. So this isn't just something for mythological characters or superheroes. This is something for CEOs, for, you know, the people you work with, the people you see on the sidelines at your kid's soccer game. It's for everyday people, and I think it's a powerful lens through which to view our own journey and transformation.
I agree. I think it's a fantastic framework for not only storytelling but for transformation. You mentioned going into the darkness. You also mentioned your own journey into that space. We have references in popular culture of getting the call. You know, like Neo is asleep and he gets the call and he's being told to follow the white rabbit in the Matrix,
Yes.
right? And you mentioned the same thing in Star Wars. We can find it in Hamlet. We can find it throughout literature, right? These are these moments when all of a sudden the universe says, yo, wake up. It's time to
Yeah.
do something different. And it often comes with some trial and tribulation and unknown, to your point. There's some struggle in that. And my question is, do we always need the struggle to create the
Yeah.
transformation? Can we
Yeah.
intend transformation? Can we say, I don't need to wait for something bad to happen
Yeah.
today, this week, this month, this year? My intention is to transform in these ways. And thank you very much, Dean and Ben, but I'm going to circumvent this idea about having to go through this. I'm going to create it myself.
Yes, yes. You know, Dean, I'm smiling because I feel like you asked this exact question at our workshop, if I
I
recall.
know.
You know,
And I
I love
still,
it. I love
and
it. I
I
love
have
it.
a follow-up one too that you
Yeah.
know I'm going to ask. So go
Yes.
ahead.
Well, and in part, it's part of why I wrote this book is for people who are not at the rock bottom, but their life is giving them cues and signs that more is possible, that
Yeah.
there's something bigger ahead for them. Okay. So as a way into answering the question, I do want to just give a little snapshot of my own story. So like I said, I had started this faith community in Seattle. It's very meaningful work. We were making a big difference in the lives of a lot of people dealing with addiction, mental illness, homelessness, women caught in sex trafficking. So
Hmm.
it was a powerful, really meaningful season of life. But after almost a decade in it, one morning I was out for a jog around this, it was called Green Lake in Seattle, do like a 3 mile run. And then I'd charge up this hill and get to the top of the hill and run 10 more blocks to my house. You know, just an intense workout to begin the day. And then I go about my workday helping people with that same level of intensity and passion. And on this particular day, I got to the top of that hill And I stopped dead in my tracks. And there was this voice that welled up inside of me. And what the voice said, I just heard this clearly, was, if you don't have your heart, you have nothing. If you don't have your heart, you have nothing. And right away, I knew this was not about my heart rate. My heart was fine, but it was something, it was a call to adventure, that's Campbell's language for the hero's journey. This is what really begins it. It was a wake-up call. It was an alarm saying that how I was moving through the world, the way I was living, was not going to be able to carry me forward. It was not sustainable. Now, I didn't necessarily know all of that or have all that language in that moment, but I did very clearly know that this voice was telling me, I'm burned out. I'm fried. I had been juggling multiple nonprofits, leading these things. My wife and I had 3 young children. She had just finished graduate school. So much going on. And I just had thought that I could keep going at the pace I was going. But I was getting this very clear sign, like, you can't keep going. You're losing your heart. It's like at some point during all this meaningful, impactful work with people I loved, my soul just kind of snuck out the back door and turned the lights off. Okay. And I didn't even know it. So I began to pull back the layers. So burnout on the surface, which I imagine many people listening to this can relate to. And might even be, oh yeah, I was burned out a year ago, I'm burned out again, right? We have these little interventions that kind of, oh, take a vacation or do this thing differently. But we keep finding ourselves back in the same place. And so what I had to do was I began to peel back the layers. And in many ways, this was with the help of a mentor, a spiritual director, and realized that beneath the burnout, there was this pattern of these masks that I'd been wearing that contributed to this overwhelm and exhaustion. And for me, I think they're particular for each one of us, but for me, I realized that for a good chunk of my life, I had been living with this allegiance to success and achievement, to perfection, and to performing to please other people, to people pleasing. Okay. So I just happened to be in a type of work, serving others and church ministry, where many people kind of view those as sort of virtuous things. And I think probably I did too, that I hid from myself the fact that I was playing a game that on a broader level, so many of us play, especially in our culture. It's this kind of onward, upward journey, bigger, faster, stronger, better. And in order to play that game, I need to be an achiever. I need to, in some sense, be a perfectionist, have very high standards. And I need to be a performance junkie, specifically around how do I show up so that other people, I can get what I want, or other people come with me. So I had to go on this journey inward to really face those things. And that's where a lot of the trials come up, and the grieving and the inner resistance and all these things. But to circle back to your question, so that's my version of the story of hearing this call to adventure. In truth, so there's a couple things about it. One, that wasn't a rock bottom moment, and thank goodness it wasn't. I had enough awareness somehow, and it's a bit miraculous, to notice that moment that something was stirring, and I had enough wisdom, I guess, to pay attention to it. Okay, and I'm grateful for that. And I had people in my life with whom I could share about that call to adventure, that interruption, and they could, help accompany me on this journey of starting to move in a different way. Had I resisted that, I can almost guarantee you that 6 months later, 12 months later, 2 years later, my life I probably would have blown up my life in some way. Who knows what that would have been in the work I was doing, in my marriage and other relationships, financially. I think that's what tends to happen if we continue to resist the call. So answering your question, no, you don't have to be at rock bottom. I know our culture loves rock bottom stories. We love the stories of everything falling apart and then rising from the ashes like a phoenix. But I firmly believe, and I see this with all sorts of people I accompany on this journey, is we often are getting so many signals and invitations before a rock bottom moment that are saying, hey, Dean, Ben, just take this step, like let go of it. Open up. There's something else here. There's maybe you're pounding on doors and you don't need to be. There's doors open over here. So I love helping people figure out how to pay attention to those subtle cues so that we don't get ourselves in a situation, maybe even as far as I got, where I was totally exhausted. Like we actually can we can pay attention to the interruption before those moments, and we can begin to align ourselves with that flow of nature as opposed to continually trying to force our own way forward, which in the end, I think is the kind of thing that leads to a more dramatic disruption on the surface of our life.
You mentioned these subtle cues, these little whispers, my words, not yours, that sort of provide you the potential for transformation or course correction, so that your strength doesn't become a weakness. You know, you don't fall into the abyss of overdoing your perfection or your need for success or whatever your recipe is on that. But I guess my question then is that's a a level of self-awareness that is a wonderful gift to have, to be able to listen to those cues. And yet I sometimes want to think about people who are in, I think about Maslow's uh, hierarchy of needs, right? The first one is we got to take care of ourselves. We got to take care of our family. We have to have a roof over our head. Is self-help a bougie process that is only around for those who have the ability to say, I've already taken care of self. Now we're on to the next step. And now I have the freedom, the luxury, the ability to go in. But if I am trying to put food on the table and I'm trying to get, you know, out of a shelter, I'm sorry, Ben, this is a great idea here, my friend, but I'm just trying to get through the day.
Yeah.
Is this sort of philosophy and process something that can be used for those who are really working on just survival?
Yeah. Well, there's two things that I like to say in response to that, and one is to say, I think that question often does come from people who, yeah, you're maybe in a situation where you're actually feeling a little guilty that you have the luxury of doing this inner examination, or you have the money
Mm.
to spend to go on a retreat or hire a coach, and
Right.
so it's a question that comes up, and I think it's a question that ultimately is we should pay attention to because it's pointing us in the right direction. And what is that direction? I want to say that always and forever, this hero's journey, in my view, is ultimately about you reclaiming who you really are and discovering your gift that you bring back. Campbell called it the boon. It's the boon, the blessing you bring, and it's something that you give away. So this is never about a journey just to give your own life more security and comfort and accolades and wealth. This is a story of becoming more fully who you are, more whole, so that you can be a more whole and healing presence in the world. So that's where I think we're always headed if we're on this journey, is that we are going to then be people who, in whatever line of work we do, whatever line of work, whatever we're called to do, it doesn't mean you have to go do hospice or go into prisons, or you can do this in your company, you can do this wherever you are, but we're people who, by the way that we show up, we are alleviating the suffering of others. So
Mm.
I answer with that first, so as to say it's not your responsibility or your concern, in a sense, of whether or not that other person whose life is they're so overwhelmed and burdened and just trying to put food on the table, it's not your concern whether or not they have time for this work, but you do. And so that's where you need to start. You do have time for this inner work. And in fact, it's in order to help that other person, right? You need to do this work so that, however that spreads out through the world, you're making the world a better place for those who don't have this quote unquote luxury. Now, having said that,
Yeah.
having said that, uh, I also would say, and I've spent time in a lot of settings where people have nothing. And I think what a lot of people overlook is, now it might not include expensive retreats and elite level conversations and sort of a membership at the local yoga studio or whatever, or taking my meditation course. But I've been alongside people dying, incarcerated, unhoused, in all these settings. And I will say, we often overlook that there's the powerless or the marginalized carries secrets. There's the secrets of the powerless. And so many times the practices or routines might look different, but they're, in a way, they're living more closely to the reality of life. Many of
Mm.
them. I'm not saying, when you're caught up in addiction, you really can't, but even
Hmm.
still, some of those people, there's a way of being present in the world and almost getting by day to day is such a concern for you that you develop a capacity in your suffering or in the adversity you're facing to pay attention to, as I said, those whispers. Like you are living more aligned. I mean, this is why I think people who don't have a lot often have some of the most intense, powerful, beautiful spirituality, is because
Mm.
they know what it is to suffer. They know what it is to depend on something more than themselves. So
Mm.
that's my second answer. I'm trying to think if there's a third, because I feel like I often do answer it another way, but those two are coming close to me right now. Well, here's what I'd say. I think there's also a way that we can take that. Um, Sometimes it is just an excuse because we're scared to slow down and really pay attention to what is going on in our interior life. So it becomes a convenient thing to point to. Um, what do
Point
you
to
think,
what? What
Dean?
are we talking about? Point to what?
Well, to point to say, it's easier to say, like, oh, this is a luxury. A lot of people don't get to do this. I can't do this. I shouldn't do this. You feel guilty. It's a way to distract yourself from the
Mm.
reality that there's something there internally that you need to get close to and explore. Um, Look, there's a lot of people that I work with, for example. I hear this question about putting food on the table, yeah, and I say this playful. It's like, this is not your concern. Like, even if you left your job, I'm not talking to you. It's like, even if you left your job, you're gonna be fine for a year or two. You're putting food on the table. You're okay. All right. Um, and so if you need to slow down or change your pace to learn how to go inward, um, you got some time. You can do this. You can afford it.
So, Ben, are you saying if you go back to the whispers, the phrase that you had just said of those who are really struggling day to day, it almost sounds like, if I were to repeat what you said, that in those conditions, you actually might be closer to the calling than those who are running 60 hours a week on two cell phones and they're running around with their head cut off, that the veil is thinner. Even though we wouldn't wish their situation on anybody, we don't want them to suffer. That's not what we would want. But in so experiencing that hardship, that veil between the calling of the message that's coming to us and our ability to potentially hear it might be very thin. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and I loved how you framed that, because you said we wouldn't wish that for ourselves, and also we're definitely not romanticizing that
No.
situation.
Right.
Um, but I'm thinking back. This is like the old pastor in me coming out. It was like Jesus has these beatitudes and says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And I think part of what that's saying is, in a sense, those who are beaten down or have nothing or are on the outside, there is a sense that they are in tune with a greater reality than themselves.
Mm.
And just to really land this for people, I think what I want to say is, I also am a firm believer that we overcomplicate our what it takes to to do this work, and I'm put air quotes, quote unquote, that practices that help us cultivate our interior life, our spiritual life, however you want to talk about that. That, by the way, these practices make us better humans. They make us better leaders. We do overcomplicate them, and there's ways. Part of that is because all this stuff, wellness, has become so over commoditized and commercialized. But at the end of the day, we're talking about very simple things that anyone can access. So if I were to say what are core practices people could engage in, you could have millions of dollars, and these would be powerful transformational tools for you. You also could be, have barely any money, working multiple jobs, riding the bus everywhere you go, all these different things, going to food banks. What are those practices? Well, a couple I'll give you are just a reflection practice. So we were talking about journaling before we started. Journaling's been a long time practice for me. At that moment of burnout, that transition moment, I realized through the help of my mentor that a lot of my journaling had turned from, it had gone from, I really, for a long time, I had been looking forward, not looking inward. And I really think journaling at its best. So look forward, dream, imagine, but something that can turn into strategizing and then trying to really control outcomes. Let your journaling, at least one form of it, be not looking forward, but looking inward. What am I feeling? What am I noticing? What am I afraid of? What am I grateful for? Gratitude, powerful
Yeah.
practice. So journaling, meditation, and I teach a certain style of meditation, very powerful, but there are so many free, I'm not even talking about apps you pay for, free meditation resources available online in libraries. So a meditation practice helping you reset your nervous system, helping you ground yourself. It leads to more clarity, greater presence. Journaling, meditation. One I talk about a lot. This one's absolutely free, and it's especially for the people running around with two phones, but it's subtraction. This is really the first practice we should start with. Take an inventory of your life. Is there anything you can subtract? Too much screen time, certain habits with food and drink, maybe too much socializing. Maybe you need to come to terms with your FOMO a little bit and miss out on a little bit more so that you can go inward, right? All sorts of things maybe there's hobbies we're overextended on. Do we need to be golfing 18 holes every weekend? Yeah, you say it's good for you, but maybe it's actually distracting from just some other time where you can tend to your heart and listen, right? Time in nature, powerful restorative practice, right? Absolutely powerful. So that's just a little assortment, and I think they're all free if you want. I think they're all free, so they're open source for anyone.
They're free, and they may not always be comfortable.
Yep.
It might be to bring yourself back home, to wake up to the beginning of the story, might be part of what we're trying to avoid. But at some point, if we turn around and face the shadows, face what that is, that time alone, those thoughts. I had a person on this podcast many years ago, a couple of years ago, and he was a meditation expert like yourself. And he said, if you have a problem being able to just keep to your mantra, or do you be able to keep to your focus around your breath, if your mind is going somewhere, follow it. Find out what it's about. What is it trying to tell you? If you're worried about something, then go into the worry. Don't uncover, don't avoid it. Find out what it's about. Not to the point where it becomes an obsession, but there's a message there, even though it's an uncomfortable message.
Yes.
Follow that down. And I'm also thinking that what's the ultimate sort of experience? And I remember doing some work with Abraham Hicks a while back, and they always said it was about joy. Experiencing joy was one of those quintessential things that we all want, that doesn't take a Lamborghini to get it. And I was just talking to somebody who came back from a mission in Africa, and she was there to support that one community around getting schools and houses put together, and people living in our economic framework, abject poverty. And she says, I've never seen more joy in people's lives in my entire life. And it just somehow it's that was a week ago. She said that to me, and it's still reverberating in my head.
Yes.
Like, these people have, in the comparative way of thinking, very, very little. And yet they have something that most of us don't have, a wealth of joy. And I know that being in India for a little bit while back, I remember people saying, this family living under this particular corrugated roof might have the same level of joy and happiness as a middle-class family living in, Peoria, Illinois. There's something to
Mhm.
this, you know,
Yes. I
that
love
you're
that you
talking
bring up
about.
the, you
Go
bring up
ahead.
that word joy. That's joy is a really central word. I feel like, right now, just so much chaos, confusion, and rapid change. So, if, I'm sure you're seeing this with all the clients you work with, right? Just AI, and it's bringing up so many questions, and there's all this economic stuff, global stuff. And it just feels like all this is accelerating more and more. And I firmly believe that part of the gift of going on this journey of reclaiming your heart, this hero's journey, going within, outcomes are actually joy, creativity, impact. These are expressions of
Mm.
you being aligned and whole, and you then deliver those into every context you're in. I know it can for some feel like, well, joy, that feels like a luxury or an extra, but joy is happiness that's not contingent on something else. It's that stable sense of contentedness that you carry through no matter what adversity you're facing. And you've seen it with people, I've seen it with people. It is possible. And that's really what separates out exceptional leaders from really good leaders, is that sort of capacity to carry forward that contagious joy. People love working for those kind of people, by the way. And you
Yes.
know, I think one of the things that you also hit on is you named the almost the discomfort of slowing down or engaging some of these practices. And this is really what's at the crux of this whole journey. We often get to a point, and this is where I was before that rainy morning run, that burnout moment. We sense we might be overwhelmed right now, but we also sense there's something more I want to do, or there's another way I want to be, another way I want to show up. And in truth, we want the journey to be onward and upward, but there always is, we have to go through the discomfort. That is the unknown, that's the darkness, that's the unfamiliar. On the other side of that, there's a fuller, freer version of ourselves. There's joy, there's more creativity, there's impact, there's new possibilities. But we can't get there. We try to force our way there, but we really can't get there if we ignore that in between space. And I think these myths weren't just written to entertain people. These myths were written as a map to help humans, to give us a sense of guidance through our own life. So they came out of human experience. So this is why there always is that second act in between of disorientation, is because this is what we experience before that grand homecoming. Um, and I guess the last thing I'll say about that is, anyone who's, you lead a company, you lead a team, organizationally speaking, that when you want to take everyone to a new place, it's going to involve disruption. It's going to involve
Hmm.
discomfort, right? So, it's not foreign territory for us, at least in our professional lives. So can we just allow ourselves also to acknowledge that same pattern is going to be there if we want to grow personally?
Yeah. Yeah. You talked a little bit earlier about, again, the hero's journey. A lot we talked about in terms of the calling, in terms of getting these messages. And we really sort of focused it on the individual. You, in your story of running around Green Lake, I've got my own, other people must have theirs. There's two questions I wanted to ask you. The first one has to do with, there seems to be, in the people that I talk to, the fear that they won't make it around the cycle, that will get stuck in the second act and never get out of it. So if I start down this path and I pick up the phone and I'm answering the call and I go through the disruption, that there isn't a way out, that I am stuck in some sort of a quicksand. And we might even, because we judge other people based on their actions, we judge ourselves based on our intentions. We might look to somebody else and say, look, see that person over there? They're still stuck. They've been stuck for 30 years. They never made it home. They never did the return. They never were the prodigal son coming back to contribute to the community. Does
Yeah.
that happen?
Yeah.
Or is there always redemption? Do we always come back?
Joseph Campbell says, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. And I think sometimes we're just not going deep enough into the cave to
Mm.
access the treasure. I think the more common pattern is not kind of going into phase two. into the unknown or into that initiation and then not going far enough and coming back. I think most often we see, well, I'll be honest, when I lead workshops and teach on this, I always see people's eyes light up when you start talking about the rising to wholeness, the 3 steps in that phase I talk about are returning home, giving your gift, being still. It's that sense of, wow, you underwent this huge thing and you're coming back, right? To this aliveness. And you've got something. I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna start this new thing and create this. People get very excited about that. I think when I was to finish the thought, it's like it's more common people want to bypass completely
Yes.
the
Yeah.
unknown, and that's where the stuckness happens. You feel like you keep starting over, and then you're something new, but then you're repeating the same old patterns again and again. And that
Mm.
cave that you fear to enter, that holds the treasure you seek, this is where going into that space and allowing yourself, and this is where it's a challenge. We want this to happen really fast. We want to be
Yeah.
really efficient. We want to get
Yeah.
in and out. But sometimes there's certain gifts of the darkness you can only discover in time. The darkness is a place of revelation. It gives you clues for what's next for you. The darkness is a place of, I like to call it renunciation, where you move from this ego-centered sort of way of life to becoming more soul-centered. This takes time for this to happen. This takes healing. This takes confronting your shadows, right? So the darkness is also a place of regeneration. It's hibernation. It recharges us for the good work we have to do ahead. So I really think the biggest barrier is our desire to have things go really fast. My own inner journey lasted about 5 years. It's a
Mm.
long time. Okay. A long time of feeling disoriented. But if we really tend to what's going on in the depths of our life, rather than just trying to make surface level fixes, that's where the sustainable change happens. When we keep tweaking things, changing things, like, they're rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic, we're going to keep finding ourselves on a sinking ship again and again. And by the way, to be clear, this does not mean checking out from your life, right? This is
Right.
all in everyday life. I'm raising my kids and I'm married and I'm going to work. I'm not eating, praying, and loving my way around the world. That might
Yeah.
be the case for some people. So I
Right.
just want to be clear. This isn't about like you need to check out from all your roles and responsibilities. It's just about beginning to create that other space where little by little you're noticing what's happening within you and welcoming the transformation that wants to take place.
I just saw this take place last week. I was with a group, and it was the second time we came together. The first time we came together, this was on a team level, is that they all got into the cave, and it scared them. It wore them out,
Yeah.
and there was a tendency, I could sense it in the room, that we just want to move on. We want to get back to where we were before. Let's go back to being productive individuals without having to face these demons. And I had to kind of continue to remind them that this takes time. This is not something like a one-off. Hey, we had one particular team building exercise and we're done. We've got teamwork done. We can check it off, right? No, I mean, if you're going to do it, let's do it, and let's really transform. And I think that whole transformational journey is something that does take time, and that we have to be patient, and we can't speed it along and move through steps faster than we should. And I've got another question for you that I wrote down that I want to get back to. So we've talked about these individuals going through these transformational processes, maybe brought on by some sort of quote unquote calling. You mentioned that there's so much disruptive things going on right now. This is end of July 2025 when you and I were talking. And I suppose one could say, yeah, change is always really rapid. Right now, though, it is pretty amazing of what's happening in our world. And it becomes a little bit overwhelming, for us to be able to process all this. Is this external rapid change on a macro level another calling to all of us? And what is that calling? If you were to guess or surmise or listen in, what are we being asked to do with all of this disruption? Call it tariffs, call it economy,
Yes.
call it politics, call it world frictions that are happening, add on to all of that? Is there something that we, if we are the big, receptor of all this information and go inside, okay, what am I getting? Not just from me internally to myself, but what is the world telling me that we collectively need to be doing?
Yeah, I love that question. So you had a fantastic conversation with Chip Conley, who I work with at the Modern Elder Academy. He's the founder there, and mid, Modern Elder Academy calls it, it's the world's first midlife wisdom school. And an image that Chip shares a lot, and we share a lot there, is that idea of not the midlife crisis, but the midlife chrysalis, right? So the image of the caterpillar, the goopy chrysalis state, and the butterfly emerging. And I bring that up to say I think that exact metaphor that is applied, what's going on, what people experience in midlife, and what that metaphor communicates is exactly where we are as a society. We're in a midlife moment. Now, what does that mean?
Hmm.
We are getting a lot. So, with all the change that's happening, a lot of things feel really shaky. There's a lot of excitement. Many things are exciting, but there's a lot of things are shaky. And so, my read on this is that we are in a moment where this is a call to adventure. It's a wake up call telling us that the ways that we've been functioning, and is that for 500 years? Is that 2,000 years? Is it 100 years? I don't know, but it's not sustainable. Okay. So the fact that we're seeing institutions being, some institutions are, falling apart, others are being actively dismantled. Regardless of how you feel about how that's happening, who's doing it, or whatever, we could look at nature and just say, there's something that's just not working anymore. And now this is terrifying, right? Because we don't know, like, how far is this going to go? What's going to
Right.
happen?
Right.
But what we can say individually is we have a choice to notice that and figure out, okay, what's my role in, if I'm noticing that something's changing, and then we're entering into an unknown, this goopy chrysalis state, and then hopefully, so there's both, we can take courage, be like, something's rattled, something's shaken, and instead of just trying to prop it all up and fight for what was, we can get curious about maybe what didn't work about that. And this is an invitation. Both, it gives us hope kind of longer term. Now, this doesn't mean people aren't going to suffer, but then we get
Mhm.
also to answer the call and say, how can I help? Or what's my role in alleviating suffering? And also, at a deeper
Hmm.
level, this is in life and work. How can I make myself someone who is an agent of change? And what that means is make myself someone who is top notch at being adaptive, to be an adaptive presence in the world, so that I can figure out what and this is my favorite definition of dharma from one of my teachers, Tom Knowles, what my personal role in the evolution of things is. So
Hmm.
as things are decaying, what's my role? As things are in the unknown, how can I come alongside others in that place? Or as new things are emerging, what's my role?
So let me add another existential big question sort of to close
Love
us
it.
off here. Um, the question that I think you'll remember me asking when we were over at MBA, the other one that I thought a lot about was, if we've got the calling, is the calling coming from my ego, coming from me, or is the calling coming from someplace else? My intuition, my higher self, God, you name it. And in my understanding, as we went through the workshop with you, that I felt like if the calling felt like it was coming from just me, just my own ego, just my own thoughts, I didn't trust it as much. I felt it was sort of like more of the same energy to continue to drive forward in whatever way that could be unproductive for me in my ability to add value. But if it was coming from something intuitive, something higher self stuff, then I went like, I can relax into that. I can trust it, and I don't have to question it. So on that macro level, when we talked about these huge things happening in the world right now, comparing it with the micro that I just described, is all of this change coming from the ego of man and women, or is this God related? Is this energy being sourced outside of the human experience, something greater? And I bring this to you because of your background, in ministry.
Yeah. 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 Um, I will humbly submit that. What a question. Um, so I say this in my book, so I want to preface my answer by saying this, that when talking about this call to adventure, which I love to use the words mystical, the mystical, I talk about cultivating a mystical presence where we're receptive to hearing these, we're noticing signs, we're paying attention to synchronicities, we're having these spiritual encounters or other sacred moments, and we're making meaning out of them. It's really important that anyone who's listening to this, I'm a former pastor. I teach a non-religious meditation style now. I'm reading spiritual things all the time, ancient texts, and also just contemporary reflections. And here's what I want to say: I don't care what you call it, God, higher power, the universe, nature, soul, the force, whatever you want to call it. What I do strongly encourage you to do is to pay attention to it. Okay, pay
Hmm.
attention to the things, and often they might scare you, but it'll reverberate with you this sort of sense of truth. It's something true, right? There'll be a deep yes to it, even if it's intimidating. Okay, so it's pay attention to that. Now, to reflect on that big question you asked, I'll just put it in. So in the Vedanta, which is the ancient wisdom out of India, they talk about these three forces of nature, and they get personified as deities. But there's basically the maintenance operator, the destruction operator, and the creation operator. Okay, these forces. And what do I see when I look at that? I'm like, oh, that's the hero's journey.
Hmm.
That's the leaving, the falling, the rising. That's the departure, the initiation, the return. That's so there's maintenance. It's how things are. And then if you try to persist too long in how things are and you're not paying attention at a personal or societal level, destruction starts to happen, right? And things get worse. Um, there's always destruction. There's always an end to certain things. Nothing lasts forever, right? But the important thing is always to be paying attention to when it's time for something to end, right? Like an example would be an umbilical cord sustains life, but
Hmm.
at some point the umbilical cord is no longer, it doesn't have a purpose anymore, and you need to cut that off, because otherwise it's going to become harmful. Okay, so do you cooperate with that destruction and persist in trying to maintain what you're doing, or do you start to align yourself with the creative force and the creative forces of nature that regenerative, rebirthing, renewing, and that's where innovation, imagination, and possibility come. So I'll let people draw their own conclusions, but I do think we are experiencing, uh, we're in the midst of a wake up call, and I think
Right.
every one of us has a role to play. And um, in some ways, the most important thing you can do right now, and I'm going to give you permission, it's not selfish, is to make sure that you are adapting yourself and cultivating your own well-being to
Hmm.
such an extent that you can be an agent of change in navigating these uncertain times.
Ben, that's a great way to close this out. Wonderful. How can people follow you? Tell us what you're up to, and about the book, MEA, those sort of things. LinkedIn.
Yep. So thank you, Dean. So good to be with you. And yeah, people can find me. Uh, you can get my book, thewayhomebook.com. BenjaminKatt.com is my website, KATT. Um, and I'm doing a bunch of workshops with Modern Elder Academy in both Santa Fe and Baja. I invite folks to join me. You can learn all about that at meawisdom.com.
Yeah, just a quick plug for that. My wife and I did that workshop with Ben and Chip Conley earlier in the year, and really, it was such a uplifting, important, valuable piece of work that we were able to experience. So anybody who's really on that, wondering whether this could be something to do it. It's just Trust me, it was really good.
We'd love to
So
have
Ben,
you.
thanks so much for your time, man. It's so good to see you. And we got to go do some
Yeah.
more karaoke.
Yeah, I would love that. Sing a little bit of The Boss.
You got
Dean,
it,
thanks
man.
so much.
You
Okay.
bet.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to Leadervation with Dean Newlund. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com, or check the show notes. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. Transform your leadership success with Leadervation.